All right, so we began 3 or 4 weeks ago talking about Joseph, and today we're going to finish up our discussion on Joseph and thankfulness. It's pretty neat to see how God causes all these things to work together. We talked about it last week of how God really is a master chess player, and he puts the pieces where He wants them, when He wants them, how He wants them. All these things work together. And so we began the discussion last week, and we'll finish today, that Joseph is now firmly planted in Egypt. And he finds himself back in a position of authority, this time not in Potiphar's household, but this time he is in authority in Pharaoh's household. And Pharaoh causes Joseph to come up through the ranks, and now Joseph is in charge of everything. Remember, Joseph told Pharaoh, explained his dream. He said, you guys are going to have 7 good years. And in those good years, you need to save, and you need to build larger granaries and hold on to all these things, because after your 7 good years, you're going to have 7 bad years of famine. And so if you want to be able to provide for your people, you need to maintain the storehouses. And so that's exactly what they do. And so Pharaoh looks at Joseph and he says, man, you're in tune with your God. You're in charge. Let me get out of your way. And so we know the story then that Jacob, or Israel, sends his sons down to Egypt. He says, go down. It's pretty neat. At one point, it shows, in my mind, I can't help but read it and think that Jacob was being a complete smart aleck to his sons. When he looks at him, he says, why are you standing here? You got the same report I got. Egypt's got grain. Why are we standing around here? Go to Egypt and buy some grain. Now, how many sons did Jacob send to Egypt? He's got, in his mind, he's got 11 left, right? He sends 10 of them. Does not send Benjamin. Benjamin is the baby. And so these 10 brothers, they go to Egypt and they begin to tell the story, and Joseph recognizes them immediately. And they don't recognize Joseph. We're talking, it's not been that long, relatively speaking. We're talking, 15, 16 years probably, maybe a few more than that. They get down there and they don't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognizes them. And so they begin telling this story that there are 11 of them. And Joseph says, well, where's the youngest? Well, we couldn't bring him because we've already had one son die, and this last son, Benjamin, is the son of our father's old age, and it would kill him if something happened to Benjamin. Well, Joseph says, I'm pretty sure you're spies. So here's what we're going to do. He said, I'm going to hold on to one of you, and you guys are going to go back and you're going to get the youngest brother, and you're going to bring him back. So they bind old Simeon. They got him tied up. And the rest of the brothers head back to Canaan. And Jacob says, well, it stinks to be him, because you're not going back. You're not going with Benjamin to bring your brother back. I've already lost Joseph. I cannot stand the thought of losing Benjamin, so they can keep him. So at some point then, story goes that Jacob has a change of heart. He says, all right, go get your brother, and you take Benjamin with you. So they go down there, and all of their money gets returned to them, and their grain sacks are all full. But this time, something different happens. When they're getting ready to leave Egypt this time, Joseph says, I want you to fill their sacks full of grain. I want you to take their money that they brought to pay for this grain, put it back in the sack. And he says, I want you to take my silver cup and you put it in the sack of the youngest one. So that's what they do. Well, they no more than leave town until Joseph looks at the guys that he's in charge of, and he says, go get them. And he says, somebody stole my silver cup. And they turn around and look at him and say, seriously? We put it in the guy's bag. Of course it's there. We know where it's at. It's going to be a quick journey. So they go and they catch up with the brothers, and they begin with the oldest. And they get down to Benjamin. And there's the cup. What are we going to do now? So they all go back to Joseph. And a couple times during this story, Joseph has to excuse himself to just go cry because he's so upset that it's been so long since he's seen his brothers and they don't even recognize him. Well, it goes on then that Joseph reveals himself. They are rightfully scared, thinking, oh my God. Again, interesting that Moses, as he's writing this story, puts in here, when they come back to Joseph and they all bow down in front of him, Moses puts in there that Joseph remembered the dream that he had. Remember that? And the brother's like, oh, you really think we're going to bow to you, little brother? And in Joseph's mind, he's thinking, yeah. Has anybody ever had one of those kind of thoughts? Like you don't verbalize it, but the thought's there. In my first church, we had a lady, Miss Alicedale. Alicedale was sweet as pie most of the time. She was an older lady. Well, we had Sunday school. The church was designed by a Methodist contractor, and I'm convinced that he designed it small so that we could never outgrow the Methodist church in town. And so our Sunday school rooms were about 100 to 120 square feet. That's tiny. And for some reason, they thought it was a good idea to put tables in those classrooms. So now you can honestly fit 6 people into a room. And so we were starting to grow. And it's cheaper to take tables out of a classroom than it is to build new classrooms. And so I sat down and I talked to my treasurer one day, and she said, Brother Tommy, you're the pastor, just take them out. I said, no, I'm not going to just take them out. We're going to vote on this. So we have a business meeting. And I said, okay, we need to take the tables out. Well, I only had one deacon at the time, and he came up with the bright idea. He said, let every classroom decide for themselves whether they're going to take the tables out or not. So just quick, how many people think that any of the tables were removed? None of them. So the next month, we got business meeting, and it was not planned this way. Just so happened all the people who loved the tables, none of them were there. And so I said, guys, we need to vote this time to take the tables out. It passed unanimously. So you guys know, if we're going to do something, let's get it over with. So that was Wednesday night. Thursday morning, I showed up and took all the tables out. Sunday morning, they showed up. Nobody said a word. Not a word. Next month, we've got a business meeting. They are not happy. Not at all. And Miss Alicedale was leading the charge. And she looked at me and she said, Preacher. Now it's funny because I started going to church there well before I became pastor. So I considered it my home church. They considered me one of them. But when I became the pastor, I quit being Tommy and I began to be the preacher. And so she said, Preacher, this was our church before you came, and it'll be our church after you're gone. And when I preached her funeral, I thought, I outstayed you. So it's just kind of that thought, I didn't verbalize that. I didn't look at her daughter and say, I got her beat. No, but in my head I thought that. So Joseph has this thought. I remember that dream. Well, so everything goes on. Joseph says, I'm not mad at you. What you guys meant for evil, God meant for good. Everything's great. There's plenty of food. Go back and get her dad. So now we got the whole family in Egypt. And we normally look to this part of the story to see how God works everything out, don't we? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. And we can ride off into the sunset, the good guy wins, everything is great. But folks, that is not where the story ends. They're going to spend some time in Egypt. 430 years. And God is just blessing them and blessing them and blessing them. They begin to multiply and everything is great because all these pharaohs remember Joseph or they know Joseph. And wonderful stories. And hey, do you guys remember the time Joseph saved us from ruin? And oh yeah, man, it's great. We get to Exodus. Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they'll also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor, and they built for Pharaoh storage cities. And they afflicted them. The more they multiplied, the more they spread out, so the more were in dread of the sons of Israel. And the Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously. That is nice ways to say they became their slaves. Anybody ever feel like you've had the rug pulled out from underneath you? Like you've had bad news, but then you get good news, and everything seems to start to turn around. And just the moment you get used to everything being good, somebody comes along and just jerks the rug out from underneath you. And immediately, what do we start doing? It's time for a good country song, isn't it? You know, we go back to hee-haw, gloom, despair, and agony on me. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Right? Anybody ever, it's the Sunday before Thanksgiving. They don't need in line now. Anybody ever have a pity party before? Again, when everything's going great, what do we say about God? He is awesome. Right? I mean, look at how He's blessing us. And we thought we were going to die, and then we didn't die. And we thought that our brother, I imagine there was some heavy explaining to do when Joseph is alive. Okay, there's probably some tension between the other brothers and Jacob. That's quickly, they get past that and move forward. Everything's going great. And then one day they wake up and they're slaves. And you say, how'd we get here? Right? How'd we get here? So now let's go back in time. Let's put ourselves in the life of a Hebrew. And we're sitting around. We can start to hear the rumblings. Slavery is a discussion. So now it's us. We're just sitting around. We're having a town hall meeting. Somebody says, how'd we get here? What do you say? What's the answer? Now don't give me just the church answer. Let's put ourselves in that situation. How'd we get here?
Joseph brought us here.
Do what?
Joseph brought us
Yeah, Joseph brought us here.
here. Bad decisions.
Bad decisions. Anybody think we should have went home earlier? Suddenly somebody's saying, I've been telling you for years we need to get out of here. We need to go back. Jacob, what did Jacob say when he got ready to die? Take me home. Joseph, when he got ready to die, what did he say? Take me home. Somebody says, we should have done that earlier. But now here we are. We've overstayed our welcome. Things were too good. Right? Suddenly things get too good. Yesterday, things were great. Today, they're too great. So we start coming up with all these ideas, and one of the things that we never mention, and we say, how did we get here? God. We never say God brought us here. And that's a challenge, isn't it? How do we wrap our mind around everything can be great one day and everything can fall apart the next, and God still be God? Or even more than that, let's say we can wrap our mind around that. How do we wrap our minds around today everything is great and we're giving God all the glory, and tomorrow everything falls apart and it's not because we've done something wrong? Nowhere do we find that the Hebrews did anything wrong. That's not in the story. In fact, we'd say the Hebrews did everything right. Wow. Well, now you and I have the ability to look back and we see the whole story. Was it important for the Hebrews to be enslaved? Yeah. Kind of the rest of the story falls apart if they're not, right? There's not much need for Moses to, The whole "let my people go" speech would have never happened if they weren't slaves. The angel of death coming through and passing over those houses that had blood on the doorpost never would have happened if they weren't slaves. A realization that we need a Savior that points to Jesus Christ would have never happened. So many things would have never happened. Good and bad alike. Wandering in the wilderness would have never happened. Right? So many things would have never happened. So again, we tend to give God the credit for the good things, and then we want to shield God from what we see as the bad things. The problem is you and I have got to quit looking at things as good and bad. And the reason why is because we're not smart enough to do that. We're not smart enough to see good or bad. Because we are very selfish. And I'm not dogging any of us, it's every one of us. We're very selfish people. For instance, there are parts of the state today very excited because we've got rain. Are there people today who are not excited because it's raining? I mean, you only get X number of days to deer hunt, right? You just say not deer hunt in the rain, right? I mean, good is relative. So we have to be able to step out of our sight to figure out what's good and bad. And so the best person to do that is God. And I know that it sounds like a broken record because I've said this every week. This has been the same message now for 4 Sundays in a row. But guys, we've got to get to the place where we just trust God. And we say, I don't know how it's going to work out. Except I know it's going to work out the way He wants. You ever met somebody that seems like they always get what they want? Isn't it aggravating? Like everything always works out the way that person is God. That is the fringe benefit of being God, is you get your way. One way or another, you get your way because you're God. But when we start trying to look at the way things happen and how God does things through our eyes, it doesn't seem to make any sense. Because I remind us that Jesus Christ dying on the cross was God's plan. It wasn't the Pharisees' plan. It was God's plan. The moment that Jesus, little baby Jesus, took his first breath, he was going to die on a cross. Before that, we go all the way back to Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, when the Egyptians said, let's turn them into slaves. Guess what? The plan was already, Jesus is going to die. We go back to the garden, Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, 3 verse 15. The whole fall experience. Plan was already, Jesus is going to die. And that's what God told the serpent. Before Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, Jesus was going to die. Everything has led us to that point. Now what's amazing is that's not the end, right? Everything that has happened since before the creation of the world will lead to the moment in time when God's children are united together with Him in heaven for eternity. That is the culmination. That is the everything. That is what all of God's plans has led to, that moment. The marriage supper, where God is our God and we are His people. That's the moment. And you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would He create Adam and Eve, knowing they're going to fall? Anybody ever met someone that was just spoiled? Never had to work for anything? What kind of appreciation do they have for much of anything? Nothing. All right, so if you and I were born and we just automatically go to heaven because we're born, and everybody goes to heaven, how special is heaven? Nothing. Would you need to tell God thank you? No. You know, it's like going to the little T-ball game at the end of the year in T-ball when they hand out trophies to everybody. Why say thank you to the guy handing you the trophy? The kid next to you got one too. The kid on this side got one too. Everybody got one. Why say thanks? So if we're just born and we're perfect, we've got nothing to be thankful for. Likewise, to continue this idea about salvation, if I can just up and decide, hey, I want to be saved, and it requires nothing from God, my plan, I came up with it. Here's how I'm going to be saved, God. I'm going to keep these 10 commandments, or I'm going to get baptized, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, or I'm going to do something. I'm going to bargain with you and come up with my own plan of salvation. What's that mean? Nothing. But you and I, when we get to heaven, we'll be there because of Him. Not because of what I've done, not because I'm super, not because I'm great, not because I'm special. When I get to there, all I will be able to say for eternity is thank you. And worship Him and glorify Him. I can remember being a kid listening to people talk about rewards in heaven. Oh, I can't wait to get my rewards. Can't wait to get my rewards. And then you read the Bible and you think, I've not earned anything. I mean, honest to goodness, this is like the best case example of getting there by the skin of our teeth, because it had nothing to do with us, because I certainly didn't deserve it. I certainly didn't earn it. And then you read the Revelation, and what does everybody do with their crowns? They take them off their head and they cast them at the feet of Jesus, because He's it. He's the only one worthy to wear the crown. So guys, what I want us to be reminded is that God has a plan even when He doesn't share it with us. And most of the time He doesn't share it with us because we're not smart enough to get it. We see today, what did God see? 430 years into the future. 430 years into the future, He saw that one day they're going to be held captive. And then we get this story of a guy named Moses. Now, you talk about a remarkable story, right? So what does Pharaoh order done? All the male babies killed, because we're scared. We don't want them to over multiply and be able to beat us out. So all the babies get killed. We've got the story of one Hebrew not killed. His mama puts him in a basket at the water's edge. He gets picked up by the princess, raised as her own. Seriously? In 40 years, Moses learns an awful lot about the way the Egyptian government works. He learns how to speak. He learns who to talk to, when to talk to him. He learns all these things. Very educated. But guess what Moses did not know? Anything about how to survive. He was more George Bush or Barack Obama than he was Bear Grylls. All right? So he's 40 years old. Well, I don't know how to do anything. Moses kills a guy and he goes on a run. Where does he spend the next 40 years? In the wilderness. What does he learn in the wilderness? How to survive in the wilderness. Then God says, I've got a plan for you. You're going back to Egypt. Don't know if that's a great plan. Yes, it is a great plan, and that's what you're going to do. And you're going to take my people and you're going to lead them out of captivity. So now, how many people are prepared to lead the children of Israel in the wilderness? And He does just that. For 40 years, He leads them in circles. Now, that's not His fault. He's following God. But for 40 years, He leads them. Never gets to step foot in the promised land. He gets to see it, but didn't get to walk in it. God's plan. God's plan. So if you stop and you think about Scripture, not as a bunch of disjointed stories, but if you look at Scripture as one story that has a beginning and an end, and everything connects, we can see that, can't we? Now what I want you to do is take that same idea and apply it to your own life. Your life is not a bunch of disjointed days, but your life is one story that has a beginning and an end, and every dot connects. Guys, that's what we've got to be thankful for. That yesterday's dot connects with today, and some dots are hurt, and they're painful, and they're horrible, and they're awful, but God has a plan. Some days are awesome, and they're great, and they feel wonderful, and then you realize, you know what, I've had 430 years to prosper, and now I'm a slave. Right? That's what the Hebrews must have felt like. The same God is always God. The same God is always God. So right now, every one of us in this room are either going through great times, or we're going through bad times, or we're just coming into great times, or just going out of great times, or just coming into bad times, just going out of bad times.